So this is voiceover part two for considerations when caring for chronically ill children and their families. So we're going to focus a little bit on the developmental concerns and considerations that we need to think about. As I've said before, development always plays a role when we deal with children. So in terms of newborns and infants, obviously we know that the stage that these guys are at, they may not be able to have any connection whatsoever in terms of the condition or any awareness. Many medically fragile infants are at risk for chronic conditions related to brain injuries and oxygen deprivation, respiratory issues, prematurity, but obviously there is no connection in the developmental mind of a young infant. NICU is also great stimulation, which will affect development. So all the lights and sounds and interruptions and manipulations those kids have. So it's important that we promote parent-infant bonding, encourage parents to be face-to-face with the child, provide a lot of skin-to-skin and holding. Skin-to-skin, face-to-face is always good. Those types of things will enable the connection, and then provide sensory stim. As we know, they're in that sensory stage, oral stage, and anything that we can do to promote that will be helpful. In terms of toddlers, their developmental task is autonomy, and often chronic illness can interfere with that. Parents do often tend to become very overprotective by this stage, especially if the child is suffering with that chronic condition and the parents feel concerned about that and want to make things quote unquote easy for the child. So therefore, we need to encourage parents to offer choices when they're available to that child and help them see that the child can develop capabilities and abilities in their own way. And we will need to validate those things and really reward those children for developing those capabilities. That will help with a sense of autonomy. Preschoolers, we know magical thinking, they blame themselves. I caused this, I was a bad girl, so I am getting diabetes. They may believe their thoughts or behaviors caused the condition, they imagine something, and they obviously interfere, hospitalization and chronic conditions can interfere with the independence that preschoolers are trying to develop. So it's very, very important that we use preschool terms, preschool understood terms, to help them understand what we're doing for procedures and treatments. Let them know that the condition is not a punishment, and let them play to promote their learning. Play is their best way of learning, and always give feedback about what they're attaining and what they're capable of doing. School-age children have a much greater understanding now. They can begin to monitor certain portions of their condition, but these guys, their biggest thing are peers and education. So they may not be in school as much. They may not have as much time with their peers for social interaction, which is necessary at this stage of the game, and they will not be able to participate in activities as much. So we need to encourage some interaction with their age group, allow visitation if at all possible, and identify some aspects that the school-age child will be able to help us with and help us manage their condition and begin to help them feel more in control. And finally, our adolescents. There is a lot of change occurring with adolescence and puberty and relationships and figuring out who we are and what we want to be. And so those challenges alone are enough for an adolescent. And when we add to it the concerns that come with a chronic condition, that can be a really tumultuous time. They are very aware that they're different from their peers at this point, and they may have a difficult time engaging and interacting with them, or they may go to the opposite extreme and actually go and act out on risky behaviors or dangerous behaviors in an effort to try to be accepted. Therefore, we need to get them involved in their illness management. They need to take control of some of these things and allow or help the parents understand that that's what that adolescent is definitely in need of. We do need to talk about sexual maturation. Just because we have a chronic condition or a condition that may affect our cognitive capabilities doesn't mean that we do not have some sexual maturation taking place. It must be discussed and allow them to think about their futures. That's what they're concerned about as adolescents, and how can we accommodate and what can they do and be in this world with their chronic condition. One thing I always like to make sure people understand, The child is a child first that has a chronic condition, not a chronic condition that we just happen to find in a child. I think so many times we often hear there's a diabetic child, and that is not what it is. It's a child that has diabetes. And first and foremost, they are a beautiful child who just happens to have this condition. And if we can remember that, we will always approach them as a child first and a condition second. So caring for the family of these children, first of all, parental reactions, of course, as you can imagine, they have a lot of distress and anger when they are first diagnosed, when their children are first diagnosed, and they go through the stages of grief. They grieve the loss of what they consider normal. They grieve the loss of what their family function may be, and they grieve the loss of hope, really, for what their children could become. They go through stages of blaming themselves, feeling guilty about various different things, maybe during the pregnancy, and this can affect how well they bond with their children. We need to pay attention to that and assess that. As I mentioned earlier, siblings can have terrible reactions. There can be a lot varying, as you can see on the screen here, from jealousy to anger to resentment, a real dislike of the sibling that is sick, and may act out in some ways just to get attention. And oftentimes when they act out, it's not in good ways. It's risky behaviors in an attempt to get some attention. In their minds, bad attention is better than no attention at all. So we need to make sure we're assessing those stressors and how the family is responding and the sibling is responding. And you can read this here, some common stressors, probably pretty much common sense here, and things that parents and the child themselves will be dealing with in the course of their lifetime. So in preparing these children for care, we need to provide education. We need to show that the parents enable them to have the information they need to be able to manage their child and understand how to use the myriad of equipment and medications that they may need. We need to teach the children to have self-care if at all possible, and really facilitate taking care of their bodies and taking care of themselves. You have a chronic condition, but you also have other health needs, and we need to ensure that patients and families understand that. Nurses often fall in the role of care coordinator and coordinating the myriad of specialists that work with these children. And oftentimes it does fall on the nurse to manage those types of things. And so we need to be aware that, especially if we work in facilities in the future where we are interfacing with these children and families, that they really rely on our work to keep things in line, keep things in order, and to keep things coordinated between all of the caregivers, all of the specialists, all of the equipment providers and nursing providers that these families work with. If we can do that, that alleviates an enormous amount of stress for the family. And finally, very quickly, I do want to mention that children will be transitioned into school with a chronic condition, if at all possible. Sometimes that's very easy to do, sometimes that is not. But the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act indicated or decided that all children with special needs need to be given the opportunity to go to school, and that the school needs to make reasonable accommodations in order to be able to educate those children in a school environment. So those, many times teachers are trying to deal with children who have very specific special health care needs, and oftentimes we as nurses are called in to train and help and ensure that people know how to manage emergency conditions or conditions that may arise with having this child in the classroom. Additionally, many of these children have nursing with them and may have a nurse in the classroom to manage those medical conditions as well, and that is often paid for by the school district. There are individual family service plans for infants and their families with special health care needs. There are individual education plans for children who are going to school and need to have a coordination of education services. And there are individual health plans that manage conditions in various settings, and we need to be aware that they exist. Sometimes nurses are involved in the development of those. And finally, we need to assist with the transition to adulthood. So beyond school, and doing a transition plan or an individualized transition plan in an effort to try to incorporate young adults with special health care needs into the community.